The empire of Augustus had problems: falling birth rates, declining religion, and political turmoil. Sounds familiar, right? So how did he fix them? Augustus looked to the past, to tradition, to reform his empire. Here's what he did, and why it still matters 2,000 years later. The empire that Caesar Augustus birthed began on rocky footing. Civil conflict had engulfed Rome since Julius Caesar's assassination in 44 BC. Now, faith in its civil and religious institutions was waning, hardly surprising given the instability of the previous decades. True believers in the old institutions had only to remember Cicero, staunch defender of the Republic, to be dissuaded from resisting the new state of affairs. Cicero's opposition to Caesar's triumvirate, and more broadly centralized power, ended when he was assassinated in 43 BC. His head was then displayed in the Roman Forum, a grim reminder that the old ways of doing things were very much not in vogue. But conservatives also remembered Cicero's warning that it was Rome's moral degradation that first led to the weakening of the Republic. Though the Republic was now gone, Rome still needed a strong moral foundation, and Augustus saw weaknesses in the moral and religious makeup of the empire. First, the empire was experiencing a crisis of faith. According to Horace, one of the many poets in Augustus's court, religion had taken a back seat to politics during the upheaval. Horace claimed that, in addition to their temples being left in disrepair, the gods' images and statues have become besmirched. But not only had their temples and idols been vandalized and allowed to crumble, the pantheon of Roman gods was being crowded out by cults to new and foreign deities. Romans were far from unified in their beliefs. Romans generally tolerated other religions and weren't necessarily forbidden from celebrating foreign deities. But more traditional Roman elites often viewed mystery cults with suspicion due to their secrecy and strange rituals. If anything, the emerging cults signaled that things were changing, adding to the air of unease. There would always be room for new gods in the empire, but a focus on traditional religion was needed to reassure some that not everything was changing. On top of political and religious concerns, Augustus feared a declining birth rate would leave the empire devoid of future warriors and statesmen. In his view, the elites had forsaken their obligations, foregoing children to pursue vice. Infidelity and licentiousness were common. Horace claimed that marriage had fallen into disrepute. Girls took dancing lessons, studied acting, fornicated, and after marriage looked for younger lovers. Sometimes even their husbands connived with them in their indulgences. Central to the issues of declining fertility and moral licentiousness was the disintegration of the Roman family, or at least that's how Augustus viewed things. He believed ultimately that the family needed to be restored to its former standards before the empire could heal. So how might Augustus course correct an empire that seemed to be distancing itself from the principles that Rome was founded on? Horace had an answer: resurrect the best of old Rome, renew the golden age that had disappeared during the years of civil war. The historian Livy, another contemporary of Augustus whose work often highlighted Roman greatness, concurred with Horace, saying that a key to Roman peace and prosperity was the return of worship to the traditional gods. Thus the emperor's strategy to restore Roman religious and social life, and aid political stability in the process, was twofold. Number one, revitalize faith in the traditional gods via building projects and public displays of piety. And number two, strengthen Roman family life through a series of laws. To reinstill a religious zeal in Romans, Augustus first sought to rebuild public monuments, especially temples. In his first year as princeps, 82 temples were rebuilt or repaired, including the temples of Jupiter, Apollo, and Mars altar within the city of Rome. Additionally, the Altar of Augustan Peace was commissioned in 13 BC, which included scenes of religious ceremonies and a representation of the ideal Roman family. Surely these images were meant to inspire pride in the traditions of Rome. But monuments and temples weren't enough. Augustus endeavored to renew the act of worship itself. He was appointed Pontifex Maximus, making him the supreme religious authority in the empire, as well as the chief political actor. Though it might seem like a gross consolidation of power, It was not necessarily seen this way at the time. Cicero, the sage defender of tradition and republican values, supported the idea that the same men should lead the state and religious rites. In a speech in 57 BC, he proclaimed, "No action of the ancestors was ever more wise than their determination that the same men should superintend both what relates to the religious worship and the highest interests of the state." The emperor, as Pontifex Maximus, was now in a position to reintroduce the old religious rites in festivals. The lustrum ceremony, a purification ritual, and the Lupercalia festival, a fertility celebration, was revived, as well as the Ludi Seculare, or secular games, in 17 BC. The Ludi Seculare were a combination of sacrifices, theatrical performances, and games held every 110 years. After a hiatus due to the Civil War, Augustus had heralds march around the city and announce them as a spectacle such as they had never witnessed and never would again. Augustus's next task, strengthening Roman family life, was more delicate than simply building temples and throwing festivals. A series of laws called the Lex Julia were enacted targeting women's infidelity and fertility, while at the same time protecting the elite class's dignity. The first set focused on outlawing adultery. After failing initially to garner support soon after ascending to the throne, Augustus was finally successful in passing the laws in 18 BC. The laws focused on ensuring the legitimacy of marriage and gave husbands and fathers various powers if they caught someone in the act of adultery. Sometimes even, killing the adulterer and their lover was permissible, depending on the party's class. The second set sought to preserve the respectability of the upper classes, a decidedly conservative position. It decreed that senators nor their progeny could marry certain classes such as actors, prostitutes, or women caught in adultery. It also attempted to increase birth rates by enacting penalties on single men. For example, childless or unmarried men were forbidden from inheriting wealth or land, and were greatly restricted in whom they could name as heirs of their own. Some surviving fragments of the law even suggest that unmarried citizens were discouraged from attending public games. They weren't necessarily forbidden from attending, but it seems Augustus was trying to create a social stigma around remaining unmarried by choice. Furthering his focus on family, the law encouraged previously divorced and widowed men and women to remarry so that they might start more families. Augustus hoped that by creating fruitful marriages, children would be abundant, ensuring a strong future. And this was his main goal, a long-lasting empire. Suetonius wrote that Augustus exclaimed, "May I be privileged to build firm and lasting foundations for the government of Rome. May I also achieve the reward to which I aspire, that when I die, these foundations will abide secure." But was his plan successful? Did he increase religious fervor and strengthen the family throughout the empire? Most scholars agree that his reforms were a mixed bag. Through his appeals to tradition in the religious sphere, he consolidated support from conservative elites who were weary of the newness of Augustus' regime, and his reign kickstarted the Pax Romana, 2 centuries of peace. But of course time was running out for the religion of Rome. Any strengthening of true religiosity for the Roman gods would not survive the all-powerful force of time. In roughly 3 centuries, the Roman gods would fight for their survival as the lower classes clamored for a new faith, Christianity. And whatever modest bolstering of marriage and family life that Augustus achieved was not long-lived either. Upper-class decadence would become famed and is often cited as a reason for the empire's downfall. Some scholars, like the 20th century English world historian Arnold Toynbee, might classify Augustus's attempted return to tradition after such a momentous event as the Civil War as a form of archaism, the idealization of the past. Archaism is when a declining society, in this case the Republic, reverts to past traditions, institutions, or religions that were its foundations when it flourished. Augustus and conservative elites looked back at the Roman Republic's golden era and tried to salvage what they could amidst the turmoil. Though this strategy often bears fruit in the short term, it is rarely successful over time. The conditions that gave rise to various traditions and institutions are absent in the new society, and one cannot turn back time. Something new must take the place of what was lost. Toynbee writes, "Schism in the soul, schism in the body social, will not be resolved by any scheme to return to the good old days. Only birth can conquer death, the birth not of the old thing again, but of something new." Of course, Augustus's rule was not altogether archaic. He did a fair amount of innovation, not least of which was establishing the cult of the emperor, which made emperor worship a common practice for the next few centuries. But the struggle to return to this golden age of Rome, even when backed by the full force of an empire, reminds us that archaism cannot be the sole response of a people that find themselves amidst a society that is completely transformed. A return to tradition can certainly be one part of restabilizing society, but as Toynbee points out, only birth can conquer death. In such a tumultuous time as we now find ourselves, what will be birthed which guides us forward? Thanks for watching this video. If you'd like more, please like and subscribe, and consider joining our Patreon community to join our mission of highlighting the truth and beauty of Western civilization. Catch you next time.